The moment Prince Harry picked up that phone for one last desperate push, the door wasn't just closing, it had already been locked, sealed, and quietly guarded from the inside, and this time, King Charles didn't hesitate, didn't soften, didn't bend, he simply refused. And what followed wasn't just a rejection, it was a collapse that exposed everything.
It's only, 3 days into the week, and already it has turned into probably one of Harry's worst weeks in 30 years.
Why have you done this to yourself? You were popular, you were beloved, and you smashed it all to pieces.
They are middle-aged teenagers, right?
Oh
This is what they are. No, but this is exactly what they are. The way that they react, the pettiness, the shallowness, the superficiality, the nonsensical issues about which they get upset. This is the sort of stuff you expect from 16-year-old girls, this sort of behavior, and we're getting it from middle-aged people.
I feel sorry for the king with this because he's been played, I think. The palace have realised too late that he's being played.
If this were a job and not a family, this guy would have been fired. They would have changed the passwords to his email accounts. They would have changed his passcode to walk into the building.
I mean, he has lost his marbles, hasn't he? I mean, he's gone completely crazy. He's never going to get this security, these armed cop guards he demands whenever he comes to Britain. He's never going to get it.
King Charles offered his son a room in Buckingham Palace, his own home, the same palace where he grew up, where he learned to ride a bike in the gardens, where he watched his mother leave for the last time. Charles said, "Come, stay here, bring your family, we'll make it work." And that offer, that wasn't just a room, it was a test, a signal, a final olive branch extended further than anyone inside those palace walls expected King Charles to go, especially at a time when every move, every gesture, every invitation carried weight, history, and risk. Because this wasn't just about logistics, it was about trust, about whether Prince Harry would finally step back into the system he once knew better than anyone else.
Can't get involved. Yet by offering him a place to stay, I think when he was told his grandchildren were coming, he was just doing the right thing.
And Harry said nothing for days. No reply, no confirmation, no phone call, just silence from California while palace staff waited, while rooms sat empty, while a 77-year-old man with cancer held a door open that nobody walked through. Silence, not confusion, not delay, but silence that stretched long enough to become a message of its own. Because inside Buckingham Palace, silence doesn't get ignored, it gets interpreted, analyzed, and eventually acted upon, and Prince Harry knew that. Prince Harry grew up inside that system, knew exactly how long was too long, knew what deadlines meant, knew what end of week actually translated to behind closed doors.
He took too long to make a decision on that, and as a result of that now, we are talking about the king putting his foot down, saying that you're no longer allowed to be in Buckingham Palace.
And then, at the last possible moment, Harry's team called, "We'll take the room." Just Harry, not Meghan, not the children, just Harry. And the palace said, "It's too late." Too late, two words that didn't just reject the request, they rewrote the entire dynamic. Because this wasn't a negotiation anymore, this was a boundary. A line drawn quietly but firmly by King Charles. And the shift was immediate, almost surgical. Because suddenly, Prince Harry wasn't being invited, he was being managed. Now, I want you to understand what too late means in this context. This is Buckingham.
Therefore, unclear why, having formally accepted the accommodation offer, it has now been withdrawn at the last moment. Prince Harry touched down here in London alone, wife Meghan and the kids staying away for now.
Buckingham Palace. They don't just open a room and leave a key under the mat. There's staffing, there's security sweep, there's protocol, there's a process. And Harry, who grew up inside that process, knew exactly how long it takes. And that's where the story begins to twist. Because insiders started asking the question nobody wanted to say out loud: why wait? Why push it to the edge? Why respond only when the window was already closing? Because this wasn't a mistake. This felt calculated, like a move designed to shift control back, to force the palace into reacting rather than leading.
Team saying about 24 hours ago that he'd accepted an offer to do so.
Well, palace officials say Prince Harry initially declined the invitation and later changed his mind after the deadline had passed, leaving him too little notice to make arrangements.
He knew the deadline. He knew what end of last week meant, and he still didn't reply in time. The question isn't whether the palace withdrew the offer. They did. The question is, why did Harry wait? And then the narrative split. Two versions, two realities, both fighting for credibility, both impossible to fully prove. And suddenly, this wasn't just a missed deadline. It was a credibility war playing out in real time.
So all along, they initially said, we're going to be staying at Buckingham Palace,
yeah.
and we're going to bring the children. children, and this is going to be the first time they're going to see each other since 2022, and they laid it out to all the people in the media. And now they backtracked on that.
They've done that a few times before.
All along.
Sources said the family initially turned the offer down on Saturday. Turned it down. A room in Buckingham Palace offered by his own father turned down. Then changed their mind 2 days later when it was already too late. A rejection first, then a reversal. And that reversal is where everything collapses, because once you say no to Buckingham Palace, once you close that door yourself, reopening it isn't simple. It's not even guaranteed, especially when the person on the other side is King Charles, a man who has spent decades learning when to wait and when to stop waiting. And here's where it gets interesting, because Harry's team didn't just accept the rejection quietly. They issued a statement, appointed one. They said, "We formally accepted the offer." They said, "We don't understand why it was withdrawn." They said, "Buckingham Palace has been aware of the relevant details since last Thursday." Now the pressure shifts outward. Statements, counter-statements, carefully worded phrases designed to shape perception. Because if Prince Harry could reframe the timeline, if Prince Harry could suggest the palace moved the goalposts, then suddenly the collapse wasn't his, it was theirs, but the palace didn't respond publicly, didn't escalate, didn't engage, and that silence again, that controlled silence, spoke louder than any denial. So now we have two stories. Palace says Harry didn't reply in time. Harry says we accepted and were rejected. One of them is not telling the truth. And behind that contradiction, something colder begins to form, because this isn't just about who replied when, it's about a pattern, a rhythm that has played out again and again, where every approach comes late, every agreement comes with conditions, every reunion comes with pressure attached, and this time, King Charles didn't absorb it, didn't accommodate it. King Charles stopped it, because while Prince Harry was making that last-minute push, trying to reopen a door that had already closed, King Charles was already moving forward, already resetting expectations, already deciding that a second chance wasn't just unnecessary, it was impossible under the same pattern. And what makes this collapse even more brutal is what happened after the rejection. Because Prince Harry didn't walk into Buckingham Palace, didn't step back into royal space, didn't even come close to reclaiming that moment instead, Prince Harry landed in London and disappeared into something far more telling, a private hotel, away from the very institution that once defined everything. Because this was supposed to be something else entirely. This trip wasn't meant to end in isolation, it was supposed to rebuild something, reconnect something, reset something that had been fractured for years, but instead it exposed just how far apart everything had become. Because while Prince Harry was in London, King Charles was also in London. Same city, same timeline, but completely different worlds. Completely different realities operating side by side without touching. And then the next layer quietly surfaced, the part that insiders began whispering about, the part that reframed everything. Because even when the possibility of a meeting remained on the table, it didn't look like reconciliation anymore, it didn't feel like family, it felt controlled, structured, almost monitored, like something designed not to heal, but to contain. Because when a father meets a son with conditions, with boundaries, with staff, positioned strategically around the room, with conversations that can be cut short at any moment, that's not openness, that's protection, and that shift says more than any statement ever could, because it reveals where trust actually stands. And Prince Harry knew that. Prince Harry understood what that environment meant, understood that every word would be watched, every reaction measured, every silence interpreted, and yet the push still came. The last-minute attempt to reopen access, to regain footing, to step back into a system that had already started to move on without him. But here's where the deeper fracture becomes impossible to ignore, because this wasn't just about timing or logistics, it was about presence, about who was there and who wasn't. Because Prince Harry arrived alone, without Meghan, without Archie, without Lilibet, and inside those palace walls, that absence didn't go unnoticed. It didn't get brushed aside. It became part of the calculation. Because for King Charles, this wasn't just a visit, it was supposed to be something bigger, something that extended beyond one conversation, something that brought the next generation back into the fold, even if only briefly, even if only symbolically. But that didn't happen, and when that didn't happen, the value of the meeting shifted, the urgency shifted, the willingness shifted. And suddenly the question wasn't whether Prince Harry wanted access, it was what Prince Harry was actually offering in return. Because inside that system, every gesture carries weight, every appearance interference sends a message. And showing up alone after a delay, after a reversal, after a last-minute push, it didn't strengthen the case, it weakened it. So when King Charles reportedly refused that second chance, it wasn't impulsive, it wasn't emotional, it was calculated. It was the result of a pattern finally reaching its limit. A pattern where every opportunity was stretched, every condition renegotiated, every moment pushed just far enough to test how far it could go. And this time, it couldn't go any further because something fundamental had changed, something that can't easily be reversed. Because once a system like that decides to stop adapting, to stop accommodating, to stop reopening doors that keep closing at the last second, the power dynamic shifts permanently. And the person on the outside doesn't just lose access, they lose influence. And that's the part that lingers, the part that doesn't resolve. Because Prince Harry is still there, still moving, still making appearances, still pushing forward, but now doing it from a distance that keeps growing, not shrinking. While King Charles remains inside a structure that no longer bends the way it once did. So the collapse wasn't just a missed stay. It wasn't just a rejected call. It was the moment when the last-minute push stopped working, when the timing stopped being forgiven, when the door didn't reopen on demand, and once that moment passes, once that line is crossed, the question isn't whether things can go back to how they were.